Welcome to this double symposium entitled Social Change, Cultural Change, Examples from Seven Societies. I am Marta Fulop from the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience and Psychology from Budapest, and I am the convener of this double symposium. This symposium addresses the fact that culture and human psychology and behavior are not stable in time, but change dynamically with socio-political, socio-economic, socio-demographic, and ecological changes. If we conceptualize culture as adaptation, then these macro-level changes apparently require changes at the psychological level as well. All the 7 presentations address these issues. In the first part of our double symposium, there will be 3 presentations. The first one will be from Klaus Böhnke from Germany, the second one by Bill Gabrenia from the USA, and this is a study from Taiwan with Taiwanese colleagues, and the third presentation will be my study carried out in Hungary. In the second part of the double symposium, there will be 4 presentations. The first one will be from Romania, but by Raluca Furdui and her colleagues. The second one will be from Israel by Michael Weinstock and his colleagues. The third one will be from India by Parul Bansal, and the fourth one will be from Mexico by Camilo Garcia and Axel Navarro Hernandez. Welcome to our double symposium. We will have a Q&A session, a live one, and our discussant will be Christian Welzer from Leopoldina University, Germany. Please pay attention to our very interesting presentations, and let's start. Thank you very much.
Good day, or as Germans would say, Guten Tag. I'm using this Australian way of addressing you because I don't exactly know when you will watch my contribution. So again, good day. My name is Klaus Böhnke, and I would like to present you my paper that I will now share with you on the screen. My paper is titled Value Development Across the Lifespan, Does Social Change Have an Impact? I will bore you a little bit by reading out my enhanced abstract. I know that all of you can read, but it is probably a good idea to bring us all together on what this paper is all about. So prominent value theorists like late Ronald Engelhardt have proposed that the values people cherish remain rather stable from late adolescence onward, and that societal value change is a matter of generation exchange, not of individual lifespan development. In simplified terms, Engelhardt assumes that people cherish what has been scarce in their primary socialization years, and when they reach adulthood, value preferences are by and large fixed, generally regardless of what happens during their adult lives. The presentation puts this proposition at a test, utilizing a longitudinal data set of 200 German peace movement activists and sympathizers who have been surveyed 10 times with 3.5 years in between measurement waves since 1988-89, when they were on average 17.5. Results obtained with a 12-item instrument developed to measure all 4 poles of the bidimensional Engelhardt value concept: self-expression values, survival values, traditional values, and secular rational values, suggests that there are, after all, some significant shifts in value preferences between the average ages of 17.5 and 51. For expression values, self-expression values, change is commonplace, with more of a downward than an upward trend across the lifespan. In line with Engelhardt's theorizing, survival values do, after all, remain stable from late adolescence to people's early 50s. For the other 2 values, traditional and secular rational values, the picture is more nuanced. Now I finally come to the study I would like to present to you. here is something like a biography of the life under nuclear threat study, as we call it. Actually, it started already with its first wave in mid-year 1985, which was the time of the deployment of US and Soviet missiles in Germany. Then the second wave, the one when we started to use the value instrument that I'm coming to a little later, there was in between these two measurements, there was the nuclear power plant accident in Chernobyl. Between 2 and 3, the Berlin Wall had come down, etc., etc. Most recently, there has been the refugee crisis, and then now COVID. Okay, let me turn to what the sample is all about. Some data, I will not go in detail through this. We have more or less a core sample of slightly under 200 who have participated in each and every wave. We started originally with 1,492 who gave us their addresses. Of course, we lost considerable numbers. At some time, we reapproached people who had dropped out. That's why you find the 100 and something percentage retention rate, just because in case you wonder, the sample is, well, predominantly female, which is commonplace in voluntary surveys. Okay, what is the instrument all about? Well, the instrument, you should remember that it was developed in 1988. This was when actually Englehart's theory still was this bipolar theory of materialism, post-materialism. Only later did it make a shift or add a second dimension. But we kind of, well, should I say, anticipated this. We have 12 items, and these 12 items, in some way or other, fit under the 4 types of values that Engelhart and his students talk of. There's first the survival values, which was formerly materialism. We try to capture that with items. If you do not perform, you will not be happy either. The most important thing in life is performance, and success in school and or at work is the most important thing in life. Now you hear a clock behind me, which says that here, when I record this, it's 1 o'clock. Okay, the other one, self-expression values, formerly post-materialism. Everyone must do something to protect nature. More and more technology is only harmful. There are more important things in life than prosperity. Then come tradition values, which are focusing on religion. There's life after death. God is above all. He created the world. God is the world. He's in all things that are around us. Finally, maybe not capturing Englehart's intentions very well. But remember, it was 1988. One should be able to behave as they see fit. And then we need nuclear power plants, and what is good for our industry is also good for us. These are the 4 times 3 items that we use to capture the 4 Engelhart values that were essentially published about only 10 years later. Well, what are the results? We treat them currently with repeated measures at ANOVA, these data. Of course, multi-level latent growth modeling is planned, which is more in line with how the data should be treated. But to give you rough and ready information quickly, I resorted to something I can do quickly by myself and need no involvement of postdocs who can do other things better than I can. Well, what are the mean ratings across all waves? First of all, protect nature takes place 1. Place 2 is by another self-expression value, prosperity. There are more important things than prosperity. The third one is a religion item. And at the lower end, there's the one that's good for our industry is good for us, and the nuclear power. If you calculate the means of the 4 value types, it's very clear that self-expression values get the highest ranks, and traditional values get the second highest ranks, whereas survival values and secular rational values get lower ranks. Okay. Mean ratings suggest that the studied sample of peace movement activists and sympathizers is rather a religious, in terms of Inglar's values, traditional and simultaneously self-expression oriented group. Relatively high scores on religion items are uncommon for Germany, which is probably the least religious country in Europe, together with the Czech Republic. Now let us look at some trends. This is the item, everyone must do something to protect nature. This was very high in the beginning and now is considerably lower, but you may also see there a quadratic trend. So it seems to somehow go up again. Similarly, more and more technology is only harmful. Also at the end, you see something like a slight upward trend, but typically this item is also going down. The item, also a self-expression item, that went up considerably between wave 2 or wave 3 and 4, and now stays up high. Another item that comes from the secular rational scale or subscale or index, everyone should be able to behave as they see fit, more or less a downward trend without any quadratic elements. And finally, God is above all, he created the world. There's a peak in between. So this seems to reflect a cubic trend. So after the financial crisis, there's an additional peak in the ratings. Now, what does this say? All 3 self-expression items are among the rather few items that saw major change across the lifespan of study participants. There seem to be downward trends for the protection of nature and for technology skepticism, but an upward trend in skepticism against prosperity as a central life. There also is a downward trend in norm rejection. It is less accepted in later waves that everyone behaves as they see fit. Also, one of the religious items, there is a downward trend. It's interesting to note, and I said that already, that there is a quadratic trend for all self-expression items. So one may be looking for an upward trend. Then there is, maybe an indication for family tasks in the early to mid 30s, eating up some of people's energy. So they shrinking or lesser importance for self-expression is seemingly understandable. For religion, there's this one cubic trend, which I already talked about. Maybe there is something like a period effect there. Of course, all listeners for this presentation must be aware that the studied sample is a very unusual sample. First of all, for obvious historic reasons, the sample is purely West German. That was of all when the study began. Secondly, the sample is very highly educated. 13% even have a doctoral degree. Also, the sample has a very clear political leaning. An absolute majority would vote for the Greens if an election were coming up at the next possible date. But what are the conclusion and what can we take for the discussion? Well, no panel data on value development between 17.5 and 51 years of age seems to be available anywhere in the world. So this in many regards imperfect data and probably indeed offer new insights in spite of its peculiarity. Ron Engelhardt was right with regard to his hunch that values are stable as of an age of something like 17 for materialism or survival values only. Self-expression values do change rather rapidly, mostly being on a downslide across the lifespan. But we may still see an upward surge when we further follow the study participants, as there are indications for a quadratic trend. There may be contextual influences of the report of the importance of religion, so traditional values may sometimes be cherished more and at other times less. So this is something that we should look at. Okay, the author must apologize. That is a final remark, an important final remark. The author must apologize for presenting rough and ready analysis, but the uniqueness of the data set may, after all, serve as a valid excuse. And by that, I say thank you for your attention. Goodbye.
I'm Bill Gabrania. I'm here to talk about my long-term research in Taiwan with my collaborators Lin Waning and Gao Jianhui. This research has been going on for decades and has been supported by a lot of people and organizations. These are some of the people who have helped me out in my research over the years and as collaborators and research assistants. And the research was made possible by the funding from two Taiwanese organizations, the National Science Council and the Zhang Jingguo Foundation for Research. Like much of what we do in social science, this research came out of a personal experience I had pretty early on in my career. I had my first sabbatical in Taiwan for a year at National Taiwan University, which is probably one of the best universities in Asia. During that time, things were changing very fast in Taiwan. The martial law had been lifted a couple of years earlier, and the country was liberalizing politically. There were demonstrations weekly for more democracy, and the quarantine with China was being relaxed bit by bit, week by week. At the right, you see some barbed wire dispensers parked in front of the presidential palace, just in case. At the end of my sabbatical year, the Tiananmen massacre occurred in mainland China, and I went to some demonstrations in downtown Taipei where they were breaking bottles because the Chinese leader at the time was named Li Peng, and Peng is also the word for bottle in Chinese. So this is a big question, the question that I encountered in Taiwan as things changed very fast. The question is, how do you get from this, a very traditional multi-family, stem family compound in rural Taiwan, agricultural society, to this? This is downtown Taichung before the earthquake, and you see, of course, modern is the thing, and to this. So in social science and in psychology, we tend to latch on to really critical constructs which dominate our research, thinking, interpretations of social, psychological phenomena for sometimes decades at a time. Of course, in cross-cultural psychology, we had the individualism, collectivism movement, which went on for some decades and really has not yet diminished that much. Social class is a central construct in sociology, and in psychology we talk about the effects of social class on, for example, value systems. Social scientists talk about norms, mores, and ideology a lot, and in psychology we talk about tightness, looseness, and similar kinds of values. Another construct, which I'll talk about today, is modernization. This is typically a sociological or political science construct, but it has important analogs in psychology, in people's values, behaviors, and value change as societies become wealthier and more developed. So I'm trying to revisit modernization as a central construct that can organize a lot of other kinds of phenomena in social science and in psychology, cross-cultural psychology. You can think of modernization in 6 acts or phases over a long period of time. Lucretius is sometimes thought of as the father of modernity. You could debate that, I guess. For sure, the European Enlightenment was the launching point for modernization in the West, and these are some of the very famous philosophers of that era. The rise of sociology in the 19th century brought us the works of Weber, Marx, Durkheim, Tönnies, and others, talking about social change, economic development, and related kinds of constructs. After World War II, another group of sociologists, Tucker Parsons and many others, developed some complex theories of how social change happens and societies modernize. Act 5 in cross-cultural psychology, other social sciences as well, brought us individualism. In some ways, this construct overshadowed and pushed aside modernization. Chidam Kajitsabasi has written that the Incal concept effectively supplanted modernization. Act 6 is where we are now, and I'm calling this act the psychohistorians. Apologies to Asimov. These are people who are doing research that involves long-term social change, looking to the past, the present, and also to the future. In some cases, using very complex analyses of large data sets made possible by modern technology. For example, of course, the world value surveys. Classic modernization theory looks something like this. This is from Marsh's work. You have large-scale developments in technology, economic systems, and industrialization, bringing about changes in social structure, behavior change of the average person, and what people call psychological modernity, or value change in many cases. Social structure covers domestic and societal structures. Modern behaviors involve moving from the farm to the city, becoming active citizens, and effectively expecting progress in many domains. Modernization came to cross-cultural psychology in the important textbook written by Marshall Siegel back in 1979. Siegel had experienced social change in Africa while doing his research on visual perceptions in the 1960s and 70s there. He devoted one chapter of this book to modernization, and that was in fact my first actual experience with the construct. Very little of this research appears in later textbooks. Siegel, along with sociologists, proposed a concept called the modern syndrome, which is a set of social, behavioral, and personality characteristics that develop together as societies modernize. Around the 1970s, modernization theory began to recede in sociology and was essentially lost, I think, to cross-cultural psychology. And sociology was challenged for theoretical problems and biases. Modernity or modernization, I think, should be reconsidered as one of the central constructs in our work. As Siegel and others had argued, it really represents a syndrome of social and psychological changes that typically co-vary as societies change. Taiwan provides an ideal laboratory to study modernization. It's really in some ways a classic case where you see rapid and far-reaching changes: urbanization, industrialization, increase in wealth, high-tech industry, and transitioning from a fairly isolated island to a highly globalized society. This graph shows the rapid increase in wealth in Taiwan during the critical period up to the year 2000 and some of the political and societal change that occurred during that time frame. As is common in modernizing societies, as Taiwan industrialized and increased in wealth, fertility dropped precipitously. This is Taiwan on the famous Engelhardt-Welzel cultural map. There are two-dimension scheme involving self-expression values and secular values. Taiwan, you see, is in this case highly secular, but pretty intermediate on the survival versus self-expression values scale. I've been doing research on modernization in Taiwan for quite a while now. This is the overall design of my research program. It involves a complex sampling scheme that's both longitudinal and cross-sectional. Today I'm talking about one part of the sample, university students. These are students at National Taiwan University. I've sampled 4 times up to as recently as last year. The measurement of modernity has been problematic from the very beginning, and it's been hard to find scales that are valid and theoretically justified, psychometrically well designed, and so on. Just by chance, or just by luck, it turns out that Yang Guoshu, one of Taiwan's most famous psychologists, had developed a set of scales to measure modernity, which he calls the TM scales, traditionality modernity scales. The scales were developed in Chinese for Taiwanese, so they're highly emic, although the constructs that the scales tap tend to be found in other Western theories also. These are the 10 constructs that Yang assesses in his TM scales. You can see they cover a wide range, although not a complete range, of constructs one might imagine to be part of the modernity construct. The open-mindedness subscale involves power relations in the classroom. The submission to authority subscale looks at, for example, respect for older people. The male dominance scale, of course, involves gender differences in power relations. So my research with college students began in 1989 when I administered the TM scales to a sample of male college students as part of a larger study involving group behavior. In subsequent waves of data collection, I added more and more scales to better interpret my findings on the TM scales. As you can see, by last year, my greed had gotten the better of me, and I was asking a lot of questions on a very long survey. Empirically, with the college student samples, the TM scales are pretty good. The traditionality scale shows a very strong single-factor model. The modernity scale is not quite as unidimensional, as 2 of the 5 scales tend to be off the first dimension or first factor. So what I found was a rapid advance of modernity, this is on the M scale, over the 4 data collection phases. You see males and females tracked together quite closely here. At the same time, you see a rapid reduction in traditionality. Again, males and females tracking together, but you see in this case, although you see on this model that women are somewhat less traditional than men. One of the core concepts in modernization involves changes in gender and gender relations. And a finding that you see in pretty much all research on modernization is that gender relations change rapidly along with other changes in societies. Engelhardt and others have argued that the best marker of societal democratization is, in fact, societal views on gender relations and sex relations, especially on homosexuality. So indeed, in Taiwan, you do see a consistent increase in values for gender equality. You also see, not surprisingly, that women are ahead of men in this regard. By the same token, you see a decrease in values involving male dominance. And again, you see that women are ahead of men in this regard. Taiwan has faced a lot of challenges in the last several decades. Of course, the greatest problem for Taiwan is the economic and military threat from across the Taiwan Strait from China. Other problems, some tied to modernization, have plagued Taiwan as they have been a problem for many other developed countries. Declining birth rates, high housing costs, declining marriage rate, political conflict, polarization, and inequality rising there as well as in many other developed countries. So these challenges are reflected pretty clearly in the optimism scale of Yang's TM scales. Optimism would be expected to co-vary with other aspects of modernity, but it's not happening in Taiwan. It's flat or declining rather than rising. So you see some pessimism on the part of these university students, despite the fact that they're actually studying at the best university in the country. Post-materialist values involve people looking for more in life than the positive and sometimes negative outcomes of modernization. They're looking for a higher quality of life. In the 3rd and 4th waves of my data collection in Taiwan, I added the World Values Survey's post-materialist values items. And you see in this short period of time there is some increase in post-materialist values. However, in this particular short period of time, the larger effect has been gender, such that men have higher post-materialist values than do women. In social science, education drives lots of things. It drives modernity, it drives political psychology, constructs. It's a primary indicator of social class effects and social change, especially modernity or modernization. In Taiwan, over the last 3 waves of my data collection, I've seen that the education levels of both fathers and mothers has increased steadily. However, the relationship of parents' education to their college student children is a bit complicated. My data show that mother's education matters more than father's education in terms of children's values, but mother's education level has co-varied so strongly with other societal changes that it's hard to tease apart mother's effect from other societal influences on children's values. So when you add to this model the gender of the respondent, of the college student, and the cohort ranging from 1998 to 2021, the effect of mother's education is pretty much wiped out. Another really important construct in sociology, and now we see in political science, is child-rearing values. It turns out that child-rearing values are both a cause and a consequence of a variety of social or societal influences and effects. To look at this, I included Melvin Cohn's child-rearing values measure in the last 3 waves of the study. The key dimension people look at in studying parental child-rearing values is the extent to which parents want to inculcate in their children a sense of self-direction or obedience to authority or conformity. This graph shows that self-direction values increased quite a bit between 1998 and 2010, but leveled off into 2021. I'm interested here in the relationship between self-direction values and modernization. Here you see the correlations between self-direction and the modernity and traditionality scales in Young's TM scales. The pattern of correlations shows that self-direction is related to high modernity and low traditionality. Adding the two gender-related subscales to this image shows exactly the same pattern. College students who claim high self-direction child-rearing values have stronger sex equality values, while those who have lower self-direction child-rearing values hold higher male dominance values. So my conclusions here are that the cohort effects we're seeing over 3 or 4 waves of the study are pretty predictable. They show that Taiwan really is pretty much on the typical common oft found path. The optimism results are quite worrying, involving a caveat or a warning concerning the direction of Taiwanese society, at least that one particular sense. The gender-related issues in my data also are very strongly in line with other worldwide patterns of how gender and modernity develop together. Education is sort of a special concept in Confucian societies. It's so amazingly highly emphasized. So it may be that education is simply not going to work the same way in such a society as you would see it in Western societies. Hence the confusing findings involving parents' education on children's values. My larger research program draws samples of middle school students and their parents using some of the same measures I've talked about here, plus additional measures involving the parents' occupational experiences. The results for these other samples are very, very close to the college students' results that I talked about here today over 3 decades. So if you're wondering what that flower is, that's a plum blossom. That's the national flower of Taiwan. And if you're wondering what all the sound is in the background as I make this recording, that is fireworks. Tomorrow is the 4th of July national celebration, and Americans are in love with things that explode. Thanks a lot for watching my video, and hope to meet you at the discussion for the symposium sometime during the conference.
Welcome to this talk by Marta Fulop and Judith Schad, entitled The Concept of Competition, Does It Change with Social Change? And let's start it. I would like to say some introductory word about competition, which is an interdisciplinary concept. It is political, economic, social, and has psychological aspects as well. Now, in terms of social change, we will start with Hungary, because there was a political system change in 1989 in Hungary. This meant the decline of the socialist system, which had been going on in the late 1980s and in the early 1990s in the Eastern and Central European countries. And this resulted in a dramatic social, political, and economic change. Competition was a key phenomenon of the transition, which from a previously banned and unwelcome concept became a desirable and a kind of driving force after the political changes. The process of democratization and the transition from the state-run economy to market economy both require competition. And also a new concept of man was required, a person who is competitive and have a competitive edge. And this is the way the person can be successful in the newly established society. This study will present data from 2000 and 2022. So let's look at some aspects of the Hungarian society in 2000. At this time in Hungary, the economic problems were very severe, with Europe's highest per capita debt and a 20% inflation rate, leading to rapidly falling standards of living. There was a shift from full employment during the socialist system to a high rate of unemployment. And as you can imagine, all this meant severe economic and social pressure and competition in the job market. Increasing inequality resulted in winners and losers in the society, and the economic decline also contributed to strengthening a kind of survival materialist value system. Scarce resources also increased existential and survival competition. Life satisfaction in 1999, so 1 year before 2000, was at its historical lowest, decreasing dramatically after the political system change. This data collection in 2000 took place before Hungary entered the European Union, which happened in 2004. And after the political changes, it was found, according to the Fulop study, which was carried out in 63 countries, that Hungarians were the second highest in institutional individualism after the US. Sorry, not after the USA, but after Greece, according to the Fulop study, which meant that they very much followed their self-interest in any kind of out-group activity. Now, in 2022, the situation has changed. Hungary is at present member of the European Union. There are 33 years have gone after the political changes, so we can no longer probably call Hungary as a post-socialist society, because, for instance, after 33 years after the Second World War, nobody called the European societies post-war societies. So this has been a long time, and although democracy is declining in Hungary, in the political system, still it is a democratic country based on democratic elections in the political arena. And although the corruption rate is high, the economy is still based on market competition for more than decades, 3 decades. And since 2010, subjective well-being has been constantly increasing, and from 5.28 in 2001, it increased to 6.18 in 2021. And also it was found in the World Value Survey that since 1999, the survival values that characterize the Hungarians to a high degree, minus 1.3, these survival values slowly and gradually move towards the post-material values, and currently the last data was plus 0.1. Now let's speak about a little bit about the perception of competition in the transitional period, and there have been quite a number of studies, especially carried out by me, comparing Hungarian young people to Japanese, to American, to British, to French. And all these studies found that, there is a relatively negative view of competition among the Hungarian young people. For instance, there was a study by Van Horn in which Hungarian and Polish adolescents said that competition is governed by jungle law, so this kind of social Darwinistic view. The Hungarian adolescents perceived competition in the Hungarian society in a more negative way than their Japanese, US, American, and British counterparts. Also, the Hungarian young people mentioned more frequently competition for money, jobs, and sheer survival than their American and Japanese counterparts. Hungarian high school students compared to French expressed more short-term result-oriented views in relation to competition, and the French expressed more process-oriented views. Compared to Japanese university students, Hungarians thought about competition in a short-time perspective, and they rather considered their rival as an enemy. So let's look at these two different generations. In the first study in 2000, the so-called system change youth participated, which Van Horn called the Omega Alpha generation, because they were the last children of the old socialist system and the first adults of the new. These respondents are now in their 40s and late 40s and close to 50. For this generation, there was a shift from a dependence culture to an enterprise culture, and from a security society to an opportunity society, which meant more competition. In the second study, which was carried out in January in 2022, the so-called post-system change youth participated, what I labeled as beta generation. They were born after the system change. They are younger than 28 years old. They have no direct experience of socialist ideology, no direct experience of not democratic institutional structure, no direct experience of system change. They were born into democracy and capitalism. They are EU citizens, they are global citizens. They are free to move for study and work, and they are the Z generation. So the research question for this study was, we thought that since the first data collection in 2000, on general, what happened with this, with the views on competition, because 22 years have gone. And as I said, competition was a key concept of the transition, but now it is an inevitable reality in all segments of the Hungarian society. So there has been an established competitive culture, let's put it that way, in the Hungarian society. So can we see any kind of change in the conceptualization and the attitude towards competition, which may indicate us this kind of social change? This was the research question of the study. The sample was in 291 participants, and in 2022, 538. Although the number of the respondents is very different, their average age is exactly the same, and exactly the same proportion of female and male participants in the two studies. And these students were university students with different majors from Budapest and the big university town in Hungary. And in terms of the majors, the sample was also matched. So this is basically a matched sample, not in terms of number, but in terms of proportion. And the method was first a qualitative method, because I really wanted to see what the students come up by themselves, what kind of ideas they come up about competition by themselves without giving them any kind of indication what you can think about competition. So there was a questionnaire with open-ended questions on competition. The first question was, what do you think about competition in general? A very easy question, and the students could write whatever they wanted, so it was a free description. Based on this first answer, we categorized the answers into positive, negative, mixed, and neutral based on the content. If there were only positive things about competition, of course, it was categorized as positive, mixed if there were both. And if we couldn't see any kind of positive or negative attitudinal statement in the answer, then we call that answer neutral. After this, we asked two questions: what kind of advantages they see of competition? So this time we explicitly directed their attentions to advantages. And then secondly, what kind of disadvantages of competition they have, they perceive, or the competition has in their opinion. Again, directing this time their attention to the potential shortcomings or potential disadvantages of competition. The data analysis was qualitative of the three descriptions. We categorized the answers first mainly into functions, what kind of functions the students attributed to competition, and the negative consequences, what kind of disadvantages the students attributed to competition. And all qualitative analysis was carried out by 2 independent researchers. Because of the big number of respondents, we can do a quantitative study. So far, we have done only counting the percentages, which are really telling, and the precise statistical analysis and comparison will unfortunately come later. So let's look at the results. First of all, the attitude. I described you that we categorized the attitudes into 4 different categories. And what you can see that there has been no change in the proportion of purely positive and purely negative attitudes, but there was a most probably significant change or shift from the neutral answers towards the mixed answers, meaning that now there is more kind of evaluative attitudinal position towards competition than it was in 2000. To put these results into perspective, from 1998 to 2000, I did the very similar study with Canadian university students and Japanese university students. And now I show you the 2000 Hungarian results and the 2022 Hungarian results in light of the Canadian and Japanese university students' answers. Unfortunately, there are no Canadian and Japanese 2022 data. So what you can see here is that the Hungarian university students were the least positive, gave the lowest proportion of purely positive evaluations about competition, both in 2000 and in 2022. So here you can see that this attitude is not that positive. Also, what you can see that in 2022, the Hungarian students provide the highest proportion of mixed answers, meaning that this attitude, they can see both positive and negative sides of competition rather clearly. Now, this is the table that shows you the results of the qualitative analysis of the advantages question, and also, of course, if in the first question in the answer they mentioned any kind of positive function of competition or function of competition, we categorize that too. So what you can see here that we created super categories: motivation, goal attainment, self-oriented type of functions of competition, and some other functions that were also mentioned. Now you can see that the biggest category was motivation, and you can see that in terms of the motivational categories, there was a big increase by 2022 in the answers of motivation, improvement, and extra effort. However, if you look at the other big category, which is goal attainment, you can see that there the answers altogether decreased, especially the function selection and survival, which is a kind of social Darwinistic concept of competition, decreased very dramatically from 36% to 13% by 2022. If we consider the motivational functions process-oriented, improvement is a process, for instance, and selection, goal attainment, reward, success, like result-oriented type of functions, you can see that process-oriented answers are much more frequent. However, in 2022, however, in 2000, these answers were more frequent. So there has been a kind of shift from this result-oriented, more social Darwinistic survival type of function of competition towards a softer, more process-oriented type of conceptualization of competition. The number of self-oriented answers like self-evaluation, gaining respect, recognition, increasing self-esteem, and such also decreased somewhat. And there were other functions like fun, excitement, and competition, bringing people together, which were small categories. I summarized these functions here, but I basically told you the basic, most important changes. Now, if we look at the three-country comparison, but you can also see this kind of change, because you can see that, for instance, in case of improvement as a function, the Hungarian responses were the lowest in 2000 among the three countries. Now the Hungarian responses are comparable to the Canadian. If we look at motivation, you can see that again the Hungarian responses were the lowest in 2000, but now they are even higher than the Japanese, in between the Japanese and the Canadian answers. You can see that in 2000, the survival, selection, the social Darwinistic function of competition was the highest among the Hungarians. However, you can see that these answers now are very similar to the Japanese and Canadian answers. I summarized it here. Now let's look at the negative consequences of competition. Here we also made super categories like a negative effect on social, psychological, and somatic health, negative interpersonal consequences, demotivation, and negative societal consequences. But you can see here that there has been an increase by 2022 in the psychological and somatic deteriorating health effects of competition, especially in terms of stress and anxiety and losing self-confidence and self-devaluation and negative emotions, and also a very dramatic increase in saying that competition can become a kind of obsession, and this goes together with destroying health and both psychological and somatic health. You can see that the average number of answers doubled by 2022. Negative interpersonal consequences and negative societal consequences didn't change, and also demotivation was a very small category in terms of negative consequences. If we look at the three-country comparison and also the Hungarian 2022 data, you can see that even in 2000, in most of the cases, the Hungarian university students mentioned more negative consequences of competition than the Japanese or the Canadian, and this became even more pronounced by 2022. The only negative consequence that was low in 2000, obsession, but was high in Japan, now reached the Japanese level. So basically, you can see that there is this kind of negativity in this respect, more pronounced in the Hungarian answers. But if we look at the average number of answers per respondents, you can see that the answers related to functions, so advantages, didn't change during these 22 years. But the proportion of negative consequences increased. However, if we compare the functions and the negative consequences and the average number of functions and average number of negative consequences, you can see that both in 2000 and 2022, even if the Hungarians in 2000 were more negative, and even in 2022 they are more negative than their Japanese and Canadian counterparts around 2000, still there are more functions listed or mentioned, more positive aspects of competition mentioned in both in 2000 and 2022. Now a short discussion. So both the omega and the beta generation have differentiated and complex concept about the advantages and disadvantages of competition. And with the societal changes between 2000 and 2022, the attitude and the exact construction of the phenomenon, however, changed. The beta generation, which was born into a competitive society, has a more differentiated view, meaning that they give less neutral and more mixed answers. The concept of competition became less short-term, less result-oriented, and less social Darwinistic, and became more process-oriented, serving improvement and motivation. This reflects the value and subjective well-being changes between 2000 and 2022, because as I mentioned, there has been a move from survival values towards post-materialistic values and an increasing life satisfaction. So the concept of competition also softened. While the beta generation doesn't perceive more negative interpersonal and societal consequences of competition, they emphasize much more its negative effect on the individual's mental and somatic health. So the positive functions of competition come with a price. But still the advantages of competition are more prevalent than its disadvantages in the students' descriptions. The potential effect of the socialist communist anti-competition ideology can rather be seen in the cross-national comparison. Unfortunately, we have no current data from Japan and Canada to compare the 2022 results with. Still, it is clear that the attributed functions to competition became more similar to the other countries that have had a longer history with market economy and democracy and are characterized by post-materialistic values. However, the attributed negative consequences were more prevalent both in 2000 and 2022, potentially indicating that the competitive experiences are more demanding in Hungary than either in Japan or Canada were, at least in 2000. But apparently Hungarian post-socialist youth learn to live and function in a competitive society. Thank you very much for your attention.